This is how you learn any language on your own fast. This wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago, but in the internet age, anyone can do this. It doesn't matter where you are, where you come from, how intelligent or dumb you think you are, how talented or untalented you think you are at languages. It doesn't matter. As long as you have the discipline to stay consistent, you can do this, right? I'm going to explain how. Basically, to speak a language implies having certain knowledge and certain skills. You need to understand how the vocabulary of the language works. You need to actually have quite a lot of vocabulary that you've learned. And this is the main thing, the most important thing, and also the most challenging. You need to learn thousands and thousands of words. That's number one. Number two is learning the proper pronunciation. You need to learn how those words sound when a native speaker pronounces them in a full sentence and fast. And this is also not easy, although it's much easier and can be done faster than memorizing thousands of words. And the third thing is grammar. Grammar is the least important and the easiest thing of them all. Yeah. So if you know grammar, you study all the grammar rules, which is what you do in language schools normally, but your vocabulary is very limited and your pronunciation is not very good, you won't understand anything and you won't be able to speak. Simply because it doesn't matter how good your grammar is. If you don't know the vocabulary, you don't know the words, you can't speak, right? And if your pronunciation is terrible as well, your knowledge of pronunciation and also your pronunciation skill, yeah, and there's a difference there. Your knowledge is understanding how it works, so that you understand the words when you hear them, but then you need to also produce those sounds, which is harder. But if your knowledge of the pronunciation and your pronunciation skill are not developed, even if you know the words and you know the grammar, you won't be able to understand when you hear those words in context, and you probably won't be able to speak in a way that sounds good or that native speakers will understand, even if you know the vocab, right? So you need vocabulary first, then pronunciation, grammar last. Why grammar last? Well, simply because if you know the words, if your grammar is non-existent, let's say you don't learn any grammar rules at all, but you learn thousands of words, you memorize thousands of words, and trust me, this is very doable and quite fast. You will be able to understand. If you know vocabulary and you know pronunciation, you will not understand very accurately. You will not know exactly what they said, but you will understand pretty well what they were talking about. Yeah, because you know most or all of the words, and you will speak like a Neanderthal. Like me go cinema tomorrow. Okay, yeah. They'll be like, this guy sounds like shit, but they will understand you. The other way around, if you know all the grammar, if you know all the cases and all the tenses, this and that, but your vocabulary is very limited, you can't speak. And you can't understand. You don't know the words. Yeah? It doesn't matter if that's a future tense and past participle this and that. Who cares? You can't understand or speak. So, vocabulary first, then pronunciation, then grammar. And the thing with grammar is, it's by far the easiest, because if you know the words and you know pronunciation, you will understand. And if you can understand, you can listen to the language a lot, and you can also read the language, and you can practice your own sentences with the translator, and all the grammar, at least the grammar that you need, you'll learn it in context. Because if you know the words, you can understand what you're reading and listening to. So eventually, all the grammar it'll start making sense, and you won't have to study the rules. That's how you learn grammar. So vocabulary first, pronunciation second, grammar last. Yeah. At first, you should focus on memorizing as many words as possible. How do we do this? mnemonic associations. Yeah, you have to associate as many words as possible every single day. Mnemonic associations is an extremely powerful tool, a technique that will allow you to memorize hundreds of words, sometimes thousands of words a week. And the way it works, it's not that easy to do at first. You need some training to get good at, but I promise you, with this technique, you can memorize insane amounts of information in general. This is also good for studying law, science, or whatever you're studying, but it's especially useful in language learning for vocabulary. Basically, you take a word, you take the meaning of the word, you create mental images for both, and you associate them. Yeah, you create some sort of story with them. How do we do this? Well, let's use dog as an example. Yeah, so dog, you can easily visualize a dog in English. And let's say you learn in Spanish, and you have to learn that perro is P-E-R-R-O, is dog in Spanish. So the way to do this is you visualize a dog first, for dog, and then you find something in English that sounds like perro. Yeah? Or par, or per, or something like that. Perro is the original Spanish word. Do you have something? Pause the video, take 10 seconds and find something in English that sounds like perro or par or parrot. Yeah, parrots could work, for example. Something that sounds or looks or is spelled somewhat similarly. Okay, and then you visualize the second word that sounds like perro or looks like perro, and you create some sort of association between both images. Have them interact, the parrot and the dog, for example, or whatever you've visualized. Make this story as dumb as possible, as visual as possible, colorful, movement. It should be memorable, right? Your brain works like this. Here you're hacking your brain. Your brain is not designed to remember mundane, boring things that you do all the time. You just do those on autopilot. Your brain remembers unusual things, shocking things, etc. So if you make up some story that's unusual or shocking, you will remember it. Your brain will remember it, at least for 24, 48 hours, maybe more. I remember words I memorized like this that I've never used in 10 years, but I still remember them. Some of the words, they fade away after a few days, but if you're also listening to the language regularly and you're memorizing hundreds of words, maybe not every day, but a few hundred words a week or even a couple of thousand words a week, you will, at least the useful words from that list, you will hear them over and over again if you're also listening to the language. So that's the second thing you need to be doing. Yeah, you combine mass memorization of vocabulary with associations and listening, daily listening. So you're reviewing the vocab and you are learning those words in context as well. You're reviewing them in context. You're learning how to use them in sentences, and you're learning the pronunciation. So if you do these two things, massive memorization of vocabulary with associations and daily listening, your comprehension will skyrocket. And then you only have to learn to speak. And for this, we've got retrieval practice, which is very simple. Remember all that vocab that you memorized with associations and that then you reviewed with listening, and now that's vocabulary that you can recognize, you understand it. Now we have to turn it into active vocabulary that you will use in conversation when you need it. Not only understand it, but use it actively. And for that, the only thing you need is flashcards and spaced repetition and retrieval practice. So you create flashcards with those words and example sentences of in English or your native language and the language you're learning. Let's say you're learning Spanish again. So you take the previous word, perro, and you take an example sentence with perro. So I'm walking my dog. Estoy paseando mi perro. and you get the Spanish and the English, and you do retrieval practice. So you get the sentences in the flashcards in English first, and you have to translate into Spanish, and you have to do it aloud. So you have to come up with a sentence first. This forces you to think in the language. Then you have to say it aloud. So you practicing your ability to speak in the language. Not only think of the words, but also your mouth gets used to saying those words in complete sentences in Spanish. You get used to speaking in complete sentences. And then you get immediate feedback, and you get the right answer. And then you repeat it aloud if you made a mistake. And then you see that sentence again later today or in a few days. And you repeat the same exercise with the next sentence and the next one, and so on and so forth, with hundreds of sentences per day. Yeah, you review hundreds of sentences per day with this, and always aloud, always paying attention to the feedback. And this will allow you to, first of all, activate all that vocabulary, because you are forcing yourself to think in the language. So you have to come up with those words. And this is, trust me, this is way better than just talking to native speakers. Because if you talk to native speakers, you tend to talk about the same things over and over again, and you use the very limited vocabulary you are comfortable with. But if you do retrieval practice with hundreds of sentences instead, you're constantly forcing yourself to come up with words and sentences, to think of them and say them aloud. Sentences and words that you wouldn't normally use. So you're expanding your active vocabulary. And also you get a lot more speaking time in the same amount of time. Yeah, you get to say a lot more in the same amount of time than in a conversation with native speakers, because you often end up mostly listening, or you end up saying a few things that you're comfortable with, and then just you chill. Also, constant feedback. Constant feedback is extremely important if you want to fix your mistakes. Yeah, if you become conversational and then you rely on conversation with native speakers to continue improving, the problem is that you will